Hello book readers, and this is the B-Side Book Reviews. Now today we're going to do something a little different. We're not going to be looking at any fiction or somebody's biography. Instead, we're going to take a walk on the other side of literature. Yes, poetry. Contemporary American poetry, that is. Now, doesn't that sound cool and artsy? I've even got my fedora on to feel even more cool and artsy. And I've got my glasses on to feel intellectual. And, as an added bonus, they help me see. Oh yes, and of course I've got the beard going on as well. Well, such as it is. Anyway, I believe I got this book back in like my junior year of college. I started out in journalism, dabbled a little bit in advertising, and then I finished up in radio, TV, and film, which is broadcasting. And anytime you have any major that has to do with journalism, whether it be print or broadcasting, you seem to dabble in a few higher level English classes, which is where this book came from. So, get your coffee, because in order to discuss poetry, man, you gotta be drinking some coffee or some really cool tea, because that's what the cool, artsy people do. They hang out in coffee shops and talk about poetry. You gotta be like them, you know. Cool. Poetry. Emotionally inspired art displayed in words. The tranquil flowing of human feelings distinctly put forth through the rhyme and measure of carefully laid out verse. Soft and gentle without cause, moving toward the light of biting emotion and oh gosh, I can't keep this up. Okay, if you've ever said to yourself, I need to brush up on my contemporary American poetry. Well, the contemporary American poetry of the 20th century, that is, well, this book is for you. Here we have a look at all of our favorite and most famous poets of the 1900s. Now, I'm just assuming there are favorites and most famous, because quite frankly, I've never heard of any of them. However, most of them do have a Wikipedia page, which is the modern distinction of fame. Yes, we break down these poets by decades, not so much by their time of work, but by their time of birth. Like right here, 19 poets born between 1920 and 1930. So, we get the lyrical chants from those bards who were busting out rhymes during World War I and through the depressed rhapsodies of the Dust Bowl days, and on up to the full-blown, artsy-fartsy, totally groovy, hippie days of the 1960s. Wow, groovy poetry. Well, yeah. Before we get to enjoy all their emotional trying gems of confusing compositions, we're allowed to be enchanted with a few pages of Meet the Poet. Don't get too excited though, because we don't get to meet them all that well. We don't get to hear about, what they did in college, what kind of jobs they have, who they're married to, what kind of car they drive. No, these bios are mostly jammed full of a bunch of dismal crap regarding how their work is influenced by the insightful imagery of some other poet that I've never heard of, or how their use of word choice rivals some other poet of days gone past, which I've never heard of, and how this word choice brings forth a lyric cadence that I could really care less about. In other words, pretty lame, boring stuff. Now, I would have settled for the bios telling us just what kind of chemical inspiration these poets partook to lay out their expressive text. Hey, Hey, the rock stars of the 60s and 70s were never shy about sharing their inspirational practices. Hey, if there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now, for it's just a spring clean for the May Queen. Groovy, man. Wow. Now, at the end of every author's work, there's a list of their published books. This guy's got 17 of them. Gee, that's a lot of poetry. Now, I was always kind of curious just how well these works sell. Now, granted, most of these poets were college professors, although one was an insurance executive. But I've always wanted to know, how much does your average poet bring in a year? Now, when you're playing the game of life, you never see that as an occupation. Doctor, lawyer, poet? Oh, yes. It's not about the money. Money is evil. That's kind of poetic. Then, of course, there's the poetry. Oh, yes, the poetry. Now, the cover of the book says poetry, so I guess I'll take their word for it. But don't look for the kind of poetry we had to memorize in junior high in this book. Oh my gosh, no. There's no charge of the Light Brigade for our memorizing and inspirational pleasure. Even though that was kind of a depressing poem now that I think about it. But poetry is supposed to be depressing and deep and confusing as hell, right? Now, if that's your look on poetry, then this book has got nearly 600 pages of non-stop, deep, dark, depressing, and confusing as hell elegies for your poetic pleasure. So, have a literary bewildered ball. Bewildered ball. Okay, the last time I was really into poetry was, let's think. I think it was my 3rd grade fine arts recital. And the only reason I have this book is because it's a leftover from some 3,000 level English creative writing class I took back in college. Now, where most of the students probably pitched the book back to the bookstore for a couple of bucks, I chose to hang on to it. I probably thought owning such a book of poetry might make me feel all cultured, leaving me to ponder whatever well-read scholars, tend to ponder. However, after reading this book, all my pondering leads to the question, people actually read this stuff for enjoyment? Better yet, people feel the need to write it? Or even more importantly, how much would the bookstore have paid me for this book? However, we always see some smooth-talking dude in the movies who's just able to roll out the poetic verses, causing the ladies to melt at his feet, brooding over his deep Don Juan words. Now, in most of my experiences with women, though, the only brooding they focused on was whether I had beer or not. I was usually met with, if I wanted to hear that lame poetry crap, I'd still be dating my screwy English professor. Screwy English professor. He had beer? Maybe he had beer. They always had beer. Okay, I realize poetry is something that must be read slowly and deeply. There's more than just the words. Kind of like the Bible, I'm guessing. Okay? But I tried. Honestly, I tried. I read some of these poems slowly, slowly and out loud with the diction of a Shakespearean actor. But such just didn't matter. I looked for the rhythm, the symbolic stuff, the structure stuff, the context, word choice, tone, and all of this other literary mumbo-jumbo that the poets' bios told me I would find so enlightening and rewarding. Regardless of what pains I took, I was faced with several what the heck moments. And the only rewarding moment I had was when I read the last one. Now, to me, a poet is just someone who can jot down a bunch of words, but is too lazy to learn how to play a musical instrument and be a songwriter. It's kind of like trying to bake a cake without a mixer or an oven. You're just left with a bowl full of sloppy ingredients that just sit there, waiting for someone to do something with it. I say this because a friend of mine used to send me poetry she wrote. She was an engineer, believe it or not. And I would take some of them and bring out my guitar and actually put some chords to it. And some of them worked. Some of them didn't. Now, if you're looking for fulfilling, rhythmically flowing poetry to soothe your inner soul, well, you might want to go listen to a Sarah McLachlan album or maybe a Slayer album, depending on your mood, because there's nothing to soothe your soul in this book. And if you're looking for something that remotely resembles rhyming, you might want to go check out a Dr. Seuss book, or maybe a Run DMC CD, or something a bit more current. Because no one is busting out rhymes in these poems. Now, I only wish I could have read these works with the same enthusiasm and love as the guy who wrote these poets' bios did. Now, there were some comments about how some works could lead the reader into frustration, but then greatly rewards them in the end. Okay, I've got the frustration part down pretty well. However, I'm still looking for the rewarding part. Yes, take this verse from Charles Wright's Snow. Things that fall in a world of fall and slip through the spiked branches and snapped joints of evergreens. White ants, and the little ribs. I'm supposed to feel rewarded from that? White ants, and the little ribs? Yeah. I prefer this. Aardvark, a burrowing African mammal, active mostly at night, that feeds on ants and termites. It is squat and heavy, with a long, sticky tongue and a long head, ending in a round, pig-like snout. Oh boy. Okay, now, this line from the dictionary has as much rhythm and cadence as Charles Wright's poem does. And, as an added bonus, I now have a deeper understanding of the life of the aardvark. Thank you, Daniel Webster. I feel so fulfilled now. What else do we have in here? Ooh, the oboe, a double reed woodwind instrument having a range of nearly 3 octaves. Okay, I realize this is not a binge reading book. Like the Bible, it's supposed to be taken slowly at one's leisurely pace for the utmost enjoyment and understanding. And in my case, utter confusion. Now, I read in the bios where some of the poets had met their demise at their own hands. Well, don't think I didn't entertain such thoughts a few times while wading through this slush pit of what my English professor declared works of art. In the future, if I want poetry, I'll read Green Eggs and Ham. At least it rhymed and had meaning. Better yet, I'll go read the words to Springsteen's Jungle Land. Now that's more my idea of poetry. The kids flash guitars just like switchblades. Tonight in Jungle Land. Okay, so that was the contemporary American poetry. Yes, I'm just not a big fan of poetry. Strangely enough, though, I have written a few poems, in school, of course, like we all had to do at one time or another. I have written them out of school. I've written a few songs, which is, I guess, kind of poetry. Now, my mom and I used to try to get together to write poetry because she would find all these contests in these magazines she would read, and she thought we had to enter these contests. And in her mind, all poems had to rhyme. That was just a rule. And I tried to explain to her, I don't think these highbrow critics, judges, or whatever want their poems to rhyme. She goes, nonsense! All poems have to rhyme! And then she started quoting all of these poems that rhymed. Like The Charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. I was going, was it 600? Anyway, it still rhymed. How many? 5? I don't remember how many hundred there were. It still rhymed. Anyway, it took her forever to come to the conclusion that these guys really didn't care if the poems rhymed or not. Anyway, as far as poetry goes, I'd rather read the dictionary.